Did you know that your brain shrinks from around 30 years of age and that stress can lead to a toxic build-up and shrink your mental capacity? Did you also know that certain lifestyle factors can negatively alter the structure of your brain? In this episode, we're joined by Professor of Neuroscience Ben Webb, who gives us not just a fascinating insight into the midlife brain, but lifestyle tips to increase brain health, build brain capacity, and reverse potentially life-altering diseases such as dementia.
It seems it's never too late to change your brain. And just one of the amazing facts is that eating well and exercising is not only good for your body, but great for your brain too. Every midlifer should listen to this because truly you'll be blown away by what you learn.
Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors with me, James.
And me, Claire. How are you all out there?
These are coming thick and fast, aren't they?
They are coming
Seems
thick
like
and fast.
only yesterday we recorded that
It was Friday, wasn't it? So that feels like yesterday. I don't feel like I had a weekend.
one. Well, it was a funny weekend, wasn't it?
It was.
We had torrential storms. I'm sure our hearts will be bleeding in Marbella. We had high winds, rain, little beach bars were washed away. I'm glad to report the sun is back now.
The sun is back. So yeah, we had to snuggle down, did a little bit of work and then watched some Netflix. It was quite nice actually yesterday, but worked a lot Saturday, didn't I?
We did. Anyway, we're really excited today because we are joined by Ben Webb, who is, as well as running a great online site called Ology, is Professor of Neuroscience. Ben, welcome.
It's like James's dream. He loves all it. Well,
I
I
love
do too.
neuroscience.
I do too, but James gets all geeky and
And
excited.
here's a man who knows a lot more about it than us.
Well, we'll find out.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So Ben, could you just talk to us a little bit about your background, like how you found your way into neuroscience, kind of like your most recent academic career?
Yeah.
Like you've been specialising mainly in midlife neuroscience, is that right?
Yeah. So I've been an academic neuroscientist for the best part of kind of 20 years, sort of researching how the brain works. And I started most of my career, I sort of just studied this phenomenon called neuroplasticity, this phenomenon that kind of the brain can change in response to your experiences out there in the world. And try to understand that, and later on in my career started trying to use that to help people to develop kind of rehabilitations for people that had developed either a stroke or dementia. And they always arrived in the lab when we were working with them. It's much later in life, so they're typically in their kind of 60s, 70s and beyond. And a lot of the time, you're really sort of picking up the pieces then, and it's very difficult to actually, instigate any kind of real help. So after sort of 20 years working in that kind of in the academic environment, and the kind of personal sort of medical thing that happened to me that made me kind of reflect on my life, I just decided that I could offer more and help more in trying to kind of, at least, without this sounding too kind of conceited, to sort of share my knowledge and help people, using the kind of understanding the way the brain works, particularly kind of things like brain plasticity, but actually trying to help people much earlier in life in terms of trying to prevent rather than later in life, when often things have gone beyond the point where you might be able to help as much as you'd like to. And I guess one of the biggest reasons is because so many sort of brain changes happen in midlife that people aren't aware of, that then only manifest as things later in life. And like I say, sometimes it's a little bit too late to do anything about it. Whereas with that in mind, you can implement, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, a lot more of these kind of interventions and lifestyle changes, that we now are really connected sort of directly to the way the brain works before actually you see some of these kind of symptoms later in life.
Yeah, well, I know we're going to dive into this midlife brain specifically.
Fascinating.
Neuroplasticity fascinates me. Could you explain, maybe just like in really simple terms, what we're always telling people is, like, we have neural pathways. Our beliefs, our behaviors, our habits run down these neural pathways.
Yeah.
The more ingrained something is, broadly speaking, the more defined that pathway is to allow the impulses to go more rapidly, more effectively. But we are capable of changing those pathways for new beliefs, habits, and behaviors. Is my understanding correct on that?
No, that's absolutely right. And the thing that the kind of sort of big game changing kind of neuroscience was that probably, maybe 20 years ago, something like that, we didn't really used to believe that you could, make those changes much later in life, in midlife, and kind of later. You tended to sort of think of it as something that happens sort of in childhood, which it does. And that is the period when your brain is most plastic. And it really just means, the brain's ability to kind of make new connections between brain cells simply based on, an experience that you've had, something that you've done in life. And that could be anything. It doesn't have to always be, it can literally be anything that can form that new pathway. But obviously you have to go through a cycle of kind of repetition and, and perhaps habit change, whatever it might be, to make that more permanent. But it's there, and it's there your whole life, which is the kind of amazing thing. And you can, even in midlife, even in your 60s, 70s, 80s, brain plasticity is still there. And in fact, you can actually, so there's different types of plasticity without getting kind of too technical about it. There's a more sort of functional stuff where you're making these new connections. You can also grow new brain cells as well, which, literally, growing a new, again, something we didn't used to believe 20 years ago, that you can grow new brain cells to then support new functions with these new connections, whatever they might be. Yeah.
Wow.
It's honestly, it's so funny. We're sitting here with the biggest grins across our face, because actually we do find this incredibly fascinating, and someone like you is such a pleasure, because actually a lot of what you're saying, to a degree, we have all of that inside our program, don't we? And we keep telling, we give, hopefully it gives encouragement to those people listening to it, even what we're doing with people, whether we've worked with them or not, or some of the stuff we've talked about on our podcast. You're just helping encourage and back up what we do say, which is, you can change, basically.
Yeah,
you can change, and we're going into the depth of it here with what you're saying, but of course you can change, and it's never too late to change. I think that's the most important thing. It's never too late to become who you always wanted to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the amazing thing is that now, and particularly with the sort of work that you guys are doing as well, it's much more connected up. So the changes you can make some strong kind of scientific case, if you need to, for why making this particular lifestyle change might actually change this way in the way in which your kind of brain works, for example, in the way we've kind of described. But we can get into this again a bit more. I mean, I could just talk about this all day long, like,
It's fascinating. And I love this overlap between kind of like what you could class as like the intangible of the psychology, but actually, the very tangible structural changes in the brain. I love it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing is, historically, some of the sort of lifestyle medicine, I mean, this is true to say when I was working as an academic, and less so now, a lot of this sort of lifestyle medicine, which is the stuff that you guys are doing and we're doing as well, didn't really get as much credence in the sort of scientific community it used to. And it's really only now that the research has been done, and you can, like I say, you can connect up, these changes to real changes in the brain, and even genetic changes. And we could talk about that as well if you want, but things that, where you can still turn genes on and off later in life. Didn't think you could do that like 10, 15 years ago, so things that you think, oh, it's hardwired, it's genetically determined, I can't change this about my existence, then actually you can with lifestyle changes. So even things as kind of what might seem as serious as things like dementia or Alzheimer's, there's a genetic contribution to those diseases. But with the right kind of lifestyle changes over the right kind of timescales, you can literally switch off the genes. And there's been studies done to show this now, that are contributing to that disease. So
Wow,
that's
absolutely
like
amazing. And I know that is a question I have for you later on around.
Sorry, I've probably jumped.
No, that's all right. So I know you actually offer like a dementia prevention. We'll come back to that in a minute.
I do want to also just add that I find that particularly fascinating. And maybe we go into this on this podcast. Maybe we take this offline. But my brother's got MS.
Okay.
So James and I have talked to him a lot about lifestyle factors, but it's a really interesting, when you've got personal experience of something and you've seen a family member go through something like that, what you're saying is very, very interesting to me, not just on the work that we do, but on a personal level.
Yeah. But I think it's really important to say, and I should say that if you start with something as kind of basic as, say, like eye color or something like that, clearly you can't change that. So some genetic stuff, right, is fixed.
Yeah.
But these kind of much more complex disorders that you often pick up, later in life, and not, where there's been a big lifestyle contribution to the disorder in the first place. Things like dementia is now becoming kind of clear. So therefore you can reverse some of those changes and turn off the genes that contributed. So it's not true. Important to say that, not true for every disorder or every, but for some of these kind of much more complex, disorders like dementia and Alzheimer's. We could talk about MS as well, if you like, offline, perhaps, for sure. But
absolutely. Because they say that stress, obviously I've done some research around it myself, because it's my brother, that the stress factors, and the more research I did around MS, the more that, I found that a lot of people that had got MS had some really stressful event, really interesting, really triggering stressful event.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be really interesting to talk to you about that. Thank you.
It's amazing how so many times that's the case with a lot of these. Like, you get these kind of like trigger events early in life that causes kind of cascade of kind of biological processes, inflammation and oxidation and so on, that cause all these sort of changes to the brain. But that doesn't mean that they're not kind of reversible to some extent, depending on what it is. So
fascinating. So you've had many years of research. Could you talk about a little bit about the main changes going on in the midlife brain, both structurally and how that might manifest?
So it's really what we've talked about already, to be honest with you, the big things. I mean, it doesn't. So the big things that are still available. So brain plasticity, being able to switch genes. There's epigenetic phenomenon, being able to turn genes on and off. But the stuff that you start seeing, I mean, this, I know we've talked a bit about this before, that you start seeing these sort of silent changes that are almost sort of going on underneath the bonnet that you're not aware of, that you see in behavior that start happening. And they really are most of the time an accumulation of it's essentially like the sort of product of your lifestyle that you've lived so far. So you often get these, big, so if we could, I'll talk about dementia again, because it's the kind of it's what I know most about, but you get these kind of big sort of changes to the, to the structure and the function of your brain. So what starts happening is from 28, 30 years onwards, your brain just starts shrinking. Everybody's brain does. It's completely normal. And that's what you expect as you move through life. And if, you live the life that you've lived, that's going to be, going to be there sitting in your brain as well. And if that shrinks over time, and that's completely normal, find it a little bit, you're a little bit slower at doing things than you used to be, take a little bit longer, perhaps your memory starts declining a little bit. It's completely, again, in midlife, completely normal as the consequences of those changes. But what happens for some people, and we don't completely understand exactly why, you get this kind of departure from that, where you get these kind of sort of protein changes that happen in and around the brain cells that either stop brain cells from communicating properly with each other, or actually get inside the brain cell itself and start sort of degrading the brain cell itself. And these toxic proteins build up sort of silently in your brain, and you're not aware of it. And this is happening, and it's happening earlier and earlier and earlier. So typically, like, as early now as in your 30s, but typically in your kind of 40s, 50s. But you don't see the manifestation of that, whatever that may be. And it might be dementia, might not be dementia, might be until much later in life. And the stuff, my sort of mission, if you like, is to try and help people, because you can change it. You can change the trajectory of that kind of process. So, so you get to a point in which how you live your life, even from sort of 30, 40 years onwards, a lifestyle that you have can change the trajectory of that. And it's really, things that matter are things like, unfortunately, women, the changes that happen to a woman's brain during midlife is much more pronounced because of menopause and because of kind of menopausal changes, and that puts them at a much higher risk of Alzheimer's and dementia than men. So something like I think two-thirds of Alzheimer's cases are women, and by the time you reach post-menopause, your risk of Alzheimer's is double the risk of a man. Wow. So it's kind of crazy numbers, so, and it's to do with, so there's many factors that contribute, but one of them, there's definitely a contribution of kind of the hormonal changes that happen post-menopause as well.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. I'm going to ask you for your lifestyle tips a second. I want to come back. You said it's happening earlier and earlier. Do you mean generally in the population it's starting to happen earlier and earlier?
It's happening earlier and earlier, generally in the population. So some of that, which again, I know you guys do a lot of work on that, is to do with our dietary changes, is a big factor. So as we talked about before, kind of sugar is the sort of the devil out there that's causing a lot of these problems. It's causing the brain to start aging more quickly. So the two, so they're all the things that you might think of, that you guys I know do in terms of like the sort of lifestyle interventions. If you think about those in the sort of in the inverse, so things like diet, exercise, sleep, stress, all of those contribute in different ways to the kind of brain aging more quickly and contribute to a lot of these disease processes. Dementia is obviously just one of them, that I'm talking about, that start kind of manifesting themselves much more quietly than than you don't see in people's behavior or symptoms until much later. And it's happening earlier and earlier because of these changes to our lifestyle. Because we're eating, as you know, way more sugar than we were like 50 years ago, even, and it's toxic. It's actually toxic.
Highly processed food, and also environmental factors. The stuff, chemicals in our food now, environmental factors, ultra processed food,
lack of movement.
No wonder it's happening, earlier and earlier. It doesn't surprise me.
So it's all the stuff that I know you shouldn't be doing to your body, and it's similar in lots of ways, and you shouldn't be doing it to your brain in the sense it causes inflammation, causes oxidation, which is essentially like you kind of like sort of rust for your brain, almost like sort of a decay process for your brain, and causes inflammation, and which is linked to diabetes and things like that as well. Again, big risk factors for kind of Alzheimer's and dementia. So I realize I'm starting to sound kind of quite depressing and negative about the, but they are like, the lifestyle changes that you can make are the big risk factors as well for a lot of these diseases.
Right. So basically, you'd be saying like kind of clean up your diet, focus on whole fresh foods, start moving your body more, try and like learn stress management techniques to lower your stress levels, make sure you're getting adequate sleep.
All of those things, and exactly, that's the ingredients for a healthy brain and the ingredients for mitigating a lot of these diseases later in life. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, we've touched on stress a couple of times here, but when we've done workshops for corporates, when we've done stress, the science of stress, basically, and I think the thing about stress, we do say it's the silent killer. It's the thing that just sits there humming away in the background, and we don't necessarily realise what it's doing to us physiologically and to our brain until we get to, our midlife, when we have things like burnout, or we start getting symptoms, physical signs and symptoms, by which time your body's been under so much stress for so long. But that's almost the end result, which is can just get worse and worse and worse.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. It's the manifestation of years of stress that you haven't noticed, because that's the norm. It's almost like our badge of honor, isn't it, in today's society? How busy am I? How much am I striving? How successful am I? It's fascinating. It's fascinating stuff, to be honest. And you saying about it's all doom and gloom. It's, to a degree it is, but at the same time, what we're saying here on this podcast is it is reversible. So
it is reversible.
That's the light at the end of the tunnel for so many people, and that it's not too late. She was saying you can do this in your 60s, in your 70s, in your 80s, but the earlier you do it, the better.
Absolutely. And you can, and like, because of those processes we've talked about that are there, it still gives you the opportunity to, for changes to your brain. And it's all those things. So sleep's so important because it literally clears away the sort of toxic proteins that contribute to these diseases overnight while you sleep. Stress management, massively important, because cortisol, as is this horrible chemical. Well, it serves a function, but then in the brain, if you're chronically stressed, it literally kind of shrinks the part of the brain that are involved in kind of memory and learning, so actively kind of shrinks them. Like, that's why when you get stressed, you often can't remember things, and you can't concentrate as well, and all those things, like, so exercise, again, the same. So what's amazing about that is that, both, again, I know you recommend in your program, but aerobic exercise and resistance training, both really, really good for the brain, and in different ways. And you need to be slightly different in men and women, depending on whether, certainly women before and after menopause. But it's aerobic exercise is tonic for the brain. It literally, more blood flow to the brain, more oxygen to the brain, and it grows new brain cells. It literally produces this factor called brain derived neurotrophic factor that literally promotes the growth of new brain cells. It's probably the biggest lifestyle change you can make for kind of improving things like your memory and your learning in those parts of the brain, right? So, and still, you can still do that, like you said, 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s onwards, it's still happening. So yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's just incredible. There you go, folks. You heard it here. Exercise is obviously not just good for your body, but is great for your brain as well. So that's great to hear.
Yeah. And also, I just wanted to touch on this. I don't know whether this is something that you touch on as a lifestyle factor as well, but I just wanted to share something that I've only just started doing, which I'm finding is unbelievably helpful for me. It's breath work. So breath work, you saying this is what led me down the path, was saying about when you're stressed, your cognitive function is impaired, you can't think straight. But also, I used to, I'm a qualified stress management consultant, so I used to go around talking about stress management techniques. And one of the things was breathing properly, which is crazy that actually I've only just rediscovered it about 15 years later, where I've actually started doing the Wim Hof method, which was incredible. So the breathing and him doing like 3 rounds, I've literally been doing it about 5 days. I can genuinely notice my energy levels are higher. My lung capacity has already improved, even with my aerobic exercise, and I'm just feeling more vital, more focused. And we do James and I both do the cold water immersion anyway.
Oh, do you? Yeah, I mean, that's
breathing techniques, never focused on it. So it's now part of my morning routine. And I haven't spoken about this. It's the first time I've spoken about it because I wanted to give it a bit of time. But I just wonder what your thoughts on that.
I mean, absolutely. In terms of, I literally just did a podcast on it this morning, on this exact issue. So for mindfulness and meditation, where breathing exercises are kind of used most. So the kind of the evidence for that now is incredible. Same thing. So it also, meditation, there's some evidence, so that it actually contributes to this factor that I just talked about as well, in terms of kind of growing new brain cells, same thing, but contributes to blood flow to the brain, carrying oxygen to the brain, and all the things that about anyway, I think probably from the work that you do, because of the consequences of, the consequences of reducing stress. So then you reduce the toxic effects of those kind of brain chemicals that interfere with things like your concentration, and often when you then have more clarity, in your thinking. So there's loads of really, and again, it's really new, and it's not, I don't know how aware people are of it, but last 10 years or so, again, it's literally a study almost every couple of weeks coming out, like showing the benefits, of mindfulness meditation, the kind of breathing exercises associated with that for improving your brain function and reducing stress, and and mental health issues as well. Really helps with your mood as well. It's literally change, elevates a lot of the brain chemicals, a mixture of brain chemicals that are actually involved in depression. It's quite similar to exercise, and they're both real mood boosters. I know we talked about that before, in that they're almost those meditative breathing exercises and exercise in their own way can be, because they work on all the brain chemicals that are involved in the mood contribution to depression, then they're much better than some of these kind of sort of antidepressant medication that are out there, because they're selectively targeting just a handful, or one or two of these brain chemicals, where things like mindfulness, breathing, exercise are working on all the brain chemicals that are involved in mood and elevating them. So yeah, there's loads of good evidence for that. Yeah,
I know, it's really exciting. I discovered it, and I've known about it because obviously the Wim Hof stuff with the cold water immersion, so I knew about it anyway, but I hadn't practiced the breathing. And I got all very excited when I said to James, "Oh, I think I'm onto something here," because actually with meditation, sometimes even I've got a really active mind. So actually even the breathing, focusing on the breathing stops you thinking. So then you're super focused just on the breathing, and your mind doesn't go wandering off. Even with guided meditation, sometimes it can go off.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, isn't it? For people, often struggle with, to get into meditation for exactly that reason. But for focusing on your breathing really helps, doesn't it? Yeah, to immerse yourself.
The whole antidepressant stuff, I was put on antidepressants for a brief amount of time. And so I'm not antidepressants, but I agree with you. They're just touching on one part of it, and they're not necessarily looking at other lifestyle factors that could be really, really helpful. And that's how I even got into doing what I do now with the exercise and fitness. I've done all the kind of spiritual practices when I was a lot younger. Actually, being put on antidepressants really made me start looking into my nutrition and my exercise. And I was like, right, okay. So then obviously that's how I got into it. I came off my antidepressants and felt really, really excited about helping other people discover their way to lift their mood naturally.
Amazing. Yeah, and it does, doesn't it? I mean, you get that feedback, right? Anyway, when everyone knows, you go for a run, the runner's high phenomenon and all that stuff, or swim or whatever it might be, you get that kind of immediate feedback, but often people don't connect it immediately. I mean, it's real changes in your brain chemicals that are causing that. Yeah.
I love all this stuff. We touched there on kind of mindfulness and breathing, thanks to Claire's question. So we talked about lifestyle factors like, I guess we say external stuff like moving more, getting your nutrition right. What about things like actively working on your cognition and your mindset, like things like affirmations, cultivating a more positive outlook? Do they have an effect on your brain structure?
They certainly do. Certainly having a more positive outlook generally. I mean, that it's a feedback loop. So being able to do that then feeds into these brain chemicals that we're talking about there, because they're so like serotonin and dopamine, and they're so they're so heavily involved in your mood that the sort of their kind of composition is really what contributes to your mood. So if you already have a positive mood, and that feeds those chemicals, and and definitely can contribute to that. But in terms of I don't know if this is exactly what you're sort of referring to, but just having a curious mind generally. So having the sort of, say curious, but literally having that trait and having the kind of wanted to kind of learn more. That can be anything. That could be learning exercise, by the way, or, learning about the brain, or reading a book, whatever it might be. But having that kind of trait of being curious, really, there's loads of good evidence that really contributes to improved brain health for all sorts of reasons. Because generally just learning, and then it's really important to say that learning could be like learning to play tennis, learning to play whatever it might be. In fact, things like complex sporting activities like tennis, or even, I know you guys probably don't have this in your program, but even things like golf or these more complex sporting activities, even weights, actually, to some extent, if you're then, it's this plasticity that we're talking about, in that they promote connectivity in the brain, they promote new learning in the brain, and they're really good. And they build this thing called brain reserve, which is this, or cognitive reserve, which is this notion that you can almost sort of build in extra capacity into your brain. So it's a kind of, again, relatively new phenomenon, but loads of evidence for it now. One of the most important things for staving off dementia as well, because what happens with dementia is everyone's brain shrinks. If it shrinks too quickly and you eat it and you move and you eat up all your reserve in your brain, then that's when the symptoms start sort of manifesting. And you can increase this reserve by having the right mindset, being curious, wanting to learn, whatever that may be. Yeah.
Awesome.
It's just fascinating.
Isn't it?
And also, like reading, people say, if you can get through a certain amount of books as well, reading really helps with cognitive function and brain health. And
do you guys speak Spanish?
I do a little.
So I learned last year when I was here for 6 months, and for me, I can understand it. My confidence has gone again. But I'm starting to, just being away from Spain, but I know for me, learning even a little bit of Spanish and taking the time to have Spanish lessons definitely helped me in other areas. Well, not just, obviously going outside my comfort zone, so we talk about that a lot. So going outside my comfort zone actually started having positive effects of taking myself out of my comfort zone in other areas, like in the business and weights and all of that sort of stuff. But you're going to tell me, aren't you, that languages is just the best way to...
It's because it's one of the most complex things to do. So anything that it's essentially the way to sort of think about it, I suppose, whatever it might be, is anything that can literally activate the most sort of diverse aspects of your brain, the most different parts of your brain, is going to be best for kind of promoting brain health. Language learning a new language, because it's particularly in midlife, because it's much harder than when you're younger, is a fantastic exercise to be able to do. But any just think of any sort of, that's why complex sporting activities are so good, because if you've got something that involves aerobic exercise, resistance, and a complex movement as well, then you're activating diverse parts of your brain, and that's going to build brain reserve. So
I think that when we speak to clients, sometimes they're just focusing on the health aspects, which is great, but we also say do other, take action that's not necessarily completely in line with health as well. So take risks, take yourself outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's going to expand.
Have new experiences.
Yeah, have new experiences, learn something new. Take yourself, because again, at midlife, we've got into a real sticky wicket, haven't we? Of just sitting there, kind of in our own comfort zones, not wanting to take a risk, not wanting to fail at anything. But actually, if we can start experiencing things that take ourselves out of our comfort zone, we gain confidence and trust. And again, that must really, really help with brain health.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's probably a really good way of putting it, taking it outside your comfort zone. I mean, that's exactly it, because you're learning new things. It's very, it literally is learning new things, whatever that may be, as simple as that kind of sounds, although sometimes as hard as, like you say, as it can be to do in midlife, or challenging to do in midlife, is incredibly, again, up there with exercise. As I mean, no one of these things on their own is, as you know, is primary, but they're all important. And that's another one that's incredibly important, but it does a different thing, builds extra capacity into your brain that you're definitely going to be leading later in life. But also, as you say, as you're saying, it builds focus, builds clarity, builds confidence, builds all those things as well. So yeah, incredibly important. Yeah.
Amazing. Now, Ben, you set up Ology. Am I saying that right? Ology?
You are, yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've got a few different programs on there. One of them is you've got a program on preventing dementia.
Yep.
Let's talk a bit about what's in that program and how that works for people, and then maybe talk about some of the other things on there as well. I know you do a lot of work with the teenage brain as well.
Yeah. So thank you for asking. So the dementia prevention program is very much what we've been talking about already. So it's built on, there's a sort of psychoeducational component to it up front, in which is because there's a lot of convincing people that you can actually even prevent dementia, because again, this new lifestyle medicine, there's a new things that are spinning up front of the program. There's a lot of work done on sort of explaining to people why, that dementia is not inevitable as you get older, and you can take back control of your brain health. And then we do, in the middle part of the program, we kind of measure people's risk. So we use a bunch of so there's a bunch of kind of measurements that we take in the actual program itself to actually measure your own personal risk for dementia. We use that data then to then guide the kind of lifestyle interventions that make up the sort of the last third of the program. And the last third of the program is all the things that we've been talking about. It's, mindset, exercise, stress reduction, learning new things to build extra capacity in your brain. Nutrition, big part of that as well. So both in terms of, I think we've talked about this before, but where, nutrition is obviously, good for your body, good for your brain, but then also the stuff that you can do for your gut health, to actually, because there's a big connection between your gut.
Second brain.
Yeah, exactly. So I knew you'd know all about it.
I was actually listening to your podcast on gut health, I think yesterday morning in the gym, and I think you're basically summarising a lot of the research. I think mainly coming out of America about getting groups of people on probiotics and finding out it's like lowering anxiety, lowering depression, and I think that's really exciting because again, we have become very dependent on pharmaceuticals. I think as a whole, if there are these lifestyle tweaks, if you can help someone feel better just by tweaking their diet again to have probiotics, I mean, that's amazing. I mean,
I think gut health is one of these things that is exploding, isn't it, in terms of our understanding now, and how it's so complicated, but so important. And if you can feed, for people that don't know, you've got millions, billions of sort of microbes in your gut that, need to be in the right kind of balance for you, for both your body, and because this is fast pathway to your brain as well. Your brain talks, back and forth with your gut the whole time, like you say, like second brain, literally in your gut. And you can promote good gut health with the right foods. So it doesn't have to, so fermented foods, for example, probiotics, prebiotics, all that stuff. So there's loads, so there's big elements of that in the program as well. So where it's not actually available yet, by the way. We're just finishing it up now, and it's getting launched in January next year. So all, those lifestyle factors, and we, help people and guide people along the way, in implementing them as well. So with some coaching as well. Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Just wanted to touch on alcohol.
Oh.
So
I'm guessing it's not good for the brain.
Yeah. So again,
I wish it was.
Yeah, it's one of the lifestyle factors that a lot when I work with women, peri-menopause, menopausal, they're experiencing so many hormonal changes. There's so many changes. Their gut health is an issue. Their low moods, low energy, all of that sort of stuff. And then more often than not, and this is understandable, especially with what's happened in the last couple of years, but so many of them are consuming, I would say, a fair amount of alcohol. And it's quite ironic. Some of them are dialing in all these other elements of their life, and they're cutting down on sugar, and they're cutting down on highly processed foods, and they're exercising, and they're doing some meditation. But then I'll call it the wine witch kind of rears its head. Yeah. So it would be really helpful if you can, and you have an opinion around alcohol. That we're not saying don't have alcohol, but it's all about balance, right?
It's about balance. I mean, unfortunately there's no getting away from it. It's not good for your brain, not good for your body, obviously. In moderation, there's some evidence, some evidence that, a small glass of red wine, because it's got certain chemicals in it, similar to berries, that are actually can promote good brain health. But generally speaking, it's not good, and it's actually quite similar to stress in what it actually does to the brain, in that it's toxic for particularly the kind of parts of the brain, again, that are involved in memory and learning. And if you drink enough alcohol, you can end up with some disorders which where you kind of really affects your memory. And it obviously does affect your memory. People know from when you drink too much, you can't remember what actually happened. So again, it has
every night.
Hey, I've just put in my special brew back in the fridge.
I had to make some sort of joke around that.
Yeah, it's I mean, particularly when it's in British culture as well, it's our thing, isn't it? Like, you know, so it's you know, it shrinks, like it's the same as stress. It shrinks the same part of the brain that's stress. So when cortisol gets elevated, it shrinks this part of the brain called the hippocampus. It's really involved in memory and learning. Similarly, alcohol, that's where it selectively kind of targets that part of the brain, and the front part of your brain called prefrontal cortex, which controls and regulates every other part of the brain. So generally, it just degrades and degenerates the brain, you know, as horrible as that sounds, you know, in quite a similar way to stress, you know, because what stress is one of these sort of seemingly sort of intangible things, but it's toxic. It's so toxic for the brain, and people don't, you know, when you get that kind of chronic stress, and alcohol behaves in a very, very similar way. Yeah.
Well, it's
like a multiplier effect, isn't it? You're stressed, so you're drinking to try and alleviate the stress, but you're just actually compounding.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the reason I asked this, we've only just started like talking about this. It's only because James mentioned this on a podcast about 4 weeks ago, and I thought, oh, it's out there now. But I'm probably on about day 115 or something like that, 120 of no alcohol.
Wow. Good for you.
And
great job.
I am. I'm proud of myself. But it was because I was sleeping really badly. I was having potentially some perimenopausal symptoms.
Yeah.
And because I know a lot, and not in the depth that you do, but you know, I know a lot about what's going on at play, what's going on with my hormones. I was like, why am I doing that? I wasn't drinking a lot, but I could see it was increasing a little bit at the weekends, and it was making me feel pretty rough. And it was more for the mental side. It wasn't the physical stuff. It was more for the mental clarity that I wanted to regain, and the sleep that I wanted to regain. And, you know, I'm very pleased to say that the energy-wise, clarity-wise, and actually connection to that higher part of me, you know, the very spiritual part of me, I definitely reclaimed that once I stopped drinking as much. So,
yeah, I mean, it's so, because it's, people always sort of think of it as, because it releases your inhibitions, people often think of it as a kind of stimulant, but it's not.
No.
It depresses your brain, like, you know, so it affects your sleep, has a massive impact on your mood, and you don't, you know, it's not often sort of appreciated how much, you know, that impact, because there's sort of interaction between lack of sleep and affecting your mood at the same time. So it's
and gut
not
health,
good.
and gut health and sugar.
I mean,
and then you've got this whole loop. So so that was one of my reasons, was the mental clarity.
Good for you. Yeah. So is James not on that journey with you then?
He is actually.
I've been supporting it. I'm still allowing myself a cheeky beer every now and again, but I've got massively cut down. Yeah, massively.
Yeah.
But my mood, you saying about mood, it's definitely improved my mood, and like the hormonal swings. So James will make some joke, because I made a joke about him now. He'll say, no, it hasn't helped at all. But you know, for me, I can tell that my you know, the PMT or some of the hormonal shifts that I was feeling with my mood have definitely evened out. Yeah.
Do you think it's relieving your kind of mood, don't you, by drinking? So a lot of times, a lot of people drink, stress reduction, you know, mood relief, whatever it might be, but it causes much bigger kind of changes, bigger in your cyclical changes in your mood. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me your opinion around that.
No. Good for you. I wish I could go for 120 days. Unfortunately, I can't.
Oh.
Ben, just briefly, what else are you offering on Ology? I mentioned there, just touched on it, you've got the dementia program prevention, dementia prevention. You're doing teenage behavior stuff.
Yeah.
What's coming up for you on there?
So our biggest offering at the moment, because we've only been going 18 months, and we're still, you know, we're building out new programs all the time, but so is the teenage stuff. So I should have said right at the start, which I didn't. I work with my wife, Zoe, who's a clinical psychologist, on the business, but she works full time in our clinical practice as well, which is why we just sort of come together for the courses. And that's her expertise, is the teenage brain stuff. And I did a little bit of that at the university, where I was working with kids, you know, who had, you know, when we're trying to help them with particular disorders, and again, trying to use brain plasticity. What we offer a kind of program, our flagship program for that is called Nurturing the Teenage Brain. And it's really, to be honest, is a kind of parenting program in which we try, and the essence of the program is for parents to actually think about what they bring to the table from their kind of history as a parent. So we use the kind of clinical psychology aspect of it with that, and then encourage sort of parenting, or encourage and support parenting of the brain rather than their behavior, which is much easier said than done, because there's so many aspects of the way that teenagers behave that people think are kind of irrational, and and emotions are out of control, they're moody, it can be a little bit aggressive, all that kind of stuff. But actually, a lot of their behavior is a completely normal consequences of the way their brain is developing. So from between the age of, from the start of puberty to the end of puberty, which doesn't actually end until your mid-20s, adolescence doesn't end until your mid-20s, a teenager's brain, an adolescent's brain completely rewires itself from back to front. So it starts at the back of the brain, the bits of the brain that are involved in sensory areas, involved in interacting with the world, goes all the way forward to the front of the brain, the bits that regulate their emotions and help with planning and control kind of some kind of working memory as well. That's the last bit that gets wired up. So what they essentially have, and this often really helps parents when we work with them on this, is you have a child that has all of the bits of the brain in place, but they're not talking to each other, they're not connected up with each other. So therefore you end up with these kind of really disjointed behaviors where, they might seem like a kind of adult in that, they're physically, they kind of look like an adult, and they can, and they're very, very good at learning, and often, very intelligent, but the part of the brain that controls their emotions isn't connected up. So the part of the brain that regulates their emotions at the front isn't connected up to the kind of emotional center in the middle of the brain. So they can't, so a lot of the time they're living in their emotional brain, which is why they get so angry, why they get so sort of head up. And another big one for lots of parents of teenagers is why they always want to sleep until lunchtime. Doesn't make any sense. We all remember that. And it just seems kind of disrespectful. They don't want to get out of bed in the morning. It's because of their brain, because their circadian rhythm is tuned in to a completely different time scale to adults. So they're tuned to stay up late and wake up late. That's what their brain is instructing them to literally do that. And it was a big campaign, actually.
Your brain's still going through this, Claire.
Okay, so we need to calm down on the jokes now.
I mean, this is really fascinating stuff, and I know so many of our listeners have teenage kids, so they're going to find it so useful.
I know, and I was going to say, maybe we do a whole, I'm just going to put this out there, actually maybe we focus on that on another podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Good idea. If you're up for
yeah, absolutely. If you guys are 100%, yeah.
I know there's so many people, like James said, a lot of our listeners have got teenage children, so actually focusing just on that would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Just what you were saying there, the whole brain is rewiring itself through adolescence. It's just,
from front to back, from back to front.
From back to front, it's crazy, and they're literally sleep is so important for them as well, because that's a sort of nurturing process in actually helping to facilitate rewiring the brain. So they need sleep, and there was a big campaign kind of years ago. It didn't come to anything, to try and persuade schools to open later, because they're not at their best when they have to get in at 8:30 in the morning, because their brain isn't actually ready to kind of start learning. But obviously didn't come to anything. But when they sleep, their brain is literally, as I'm sure you guys know, that consolidating what they've learned from the day before. And that's getting kind of all, and the rewiring, whilst, and the consolidation of the learning and the rewiring is happening while they sleep. Mm-hmm. So they need to sleep, because this massive, dramatic kind of, it's literally like they start off with one brain at the beginning of the teenage years, end up with a completely different one, because it also means things like, parents often worry, as you get, I know you guys have dealt with this, that, a lot of the time, trauma, when it does happen, often happens early, can often happen early in life. And there's this big window of opportunity in the teenage years, where if, you can reverse some of those sort of really, really damaging effects of some of the things that have happened kind of earlier in life, because of this big change to their brain in this window. And it's protracted. It's like the whole of puberty and the whole of adolescence is 14, 15 years. So that's how long it takes for it to actually, for the brain to completely rewire. So,
and also, the work you're doing there, I know this is quite a bold thing to say, but I can imagine it just helps bring families back together. You know, it's really beautiful work actually what you're doing. If you look at it like that, it's helping parents understand. So you know, of course teenagers go in one direction when they're growing up. Parents can't understand them, so they're getting drifting further and further apart. So actually, the awareness piece that you're creating for those parents is a really beautiful thing. And then the teenagers feel nurtured and, you know, understood. Which is the main problem as they're growing up, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. So the awareness bit is people sort of underestimate that. I think a lot of time with courses. I know it's a big part of your work as well. That it's so important. Just having that, you know, being aware. It kind of blows people's mind. You're like, oh, okay, then that's why they're behaving that way. And then, I mean, managing it on a day-to-day basis can still be challenging, and that's where some of the behavioral change stuff, you know, comes in. But just being aware of, you know, some of those changes that are going on, and they're just a few examples. There are kind of, like you say, you could do a whole kind of podcast on it. I think
we should do a whole podcast on the teenage brain.
Well, awareness.
If you guys are up for it, I mean, absolutely, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Awareness, you know, we always say awareness to yourself, your own behaviour brings compassion to yourself. And then if you're aware of what's going on for someone else, it also breeds compassion for them as well. So that's the first step to change, isn't it?
It is. And we do a lot of work with the parents as well, in that you know, everyone brings their own history to a kind of parenting relationship, you know, and that has a big influence on how you kind of parent. You can't change that history. You know, obviously you wouldn't want to. Same thing, it's awareness, trying to become aware of, you know, how your behaviors and how they, you know, how they're interacting with your child's behavior and so on. So yeah.
Ben, thank you so much. That has been like truly fascinating.
It's
listeners, if you want to find out more, Ben, where can people get hold of you and find out more?
You can find out more on our website, which is ologyonlinecourses.com. That's pretty much there. We have all the resources and all the kind of information. We have a podcast as well called Better Brain, Better You, which I know you guys will be featuring on in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, we're going to be on it. Well,
it's a great podcast. Actually, I've been listening to it in the gym when I've been training.
We were very grateful to be on yours as well. So
no, it was great. So that comes out in a couple of weeks.
Amazing.
Well, we'll put those links in our show notes.
Yes, I'll put all the links in the show notes, so you don't necessarily have to scribble this down. If you're driving, don't do that. It's in the show notes. I'll pop all the details in there. And I just echo what James has said. It's been an utterly fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute joy talking to you.
Thank you for all the work you're doing. It's really important.
Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you, so drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors. Yeah.